Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. Alright, just to get this out of the way immediately, I am visiting my family for the next few weeks, so for the next few vlogs I will more than likely be on this location with the exception of one that I recorded beforehand. You'll know which vlog that is because when it comes out it'll be on my normal set. And with that out of the way, I just got back from watching Alien Covenant, otherwise known as Prometheus 2. Now, before I talk about this movie, I should probably first mention how I felt about the first Prometheus. Some of you have probably seen the vlog I did with my buddy Count Jacula back when Prometheus first came out, and back then, I actually liked the movie after initially seeing it. But over time and through subsequent rewatches, my feelings on the movie have gone increasingly negative over the years. There's a lot of things about the movie that just don't add up, and there's a whole bunch of character decisions that make no sense on a narrative or script level. A good example being, if all these scientists were the best in their field, then why did the biologist play around with this life form that he discovered for the first time? He should know better than anyone the dangers of dealing with a new life form on a new planet that humans have never encountered before. But anyway, that's just one of many things that made less and less sense the further I got away from the movie's initial release. So these days, while I would say Prometheus is an exceptionally pretty film, it's not a particularly well written one. And even some stellar performances by people like Guy Pearce or Michael Fassbender wasn't enough to elevate it beyond being incredibly disappointing. Especially if you, like me, were an Alien fan and really looking forward to this idea of this Alien prequel, only to end up watching a movie that you find out afterwards went out of its way to not be a prequel. I mean, it takes place in the same universe, it takes place before the original movie, but it doesn't leave off where the first movie began. So yeah, do I still like Prometheus? Not really. I kinda hate the movie now, but I do appreciate it for its visual flair. So naturally, as a result of that, I was kinda hesitant to even see Alien Covenant in theaters because I was worried it would just be a continuation of the thing that I didn't like anymore. Which leads us to the movie that I saw earlier today, and I guess the question is, did I like Alien Covenant despite not really liking Prometheus? And that is a question that is easier asked than answered, because I did ultimately like it as a movie. Like, if you were to separate it from the Alien franchise and give it to me as its own standalone film, it's actually really fucking well made. But everything about it that makes it a prequel to Alien, and this is way more of a prequel than Prometheus was, yeah, I didn't like those elements, like, at all. But unfortunately, I can't talk about those elements without going into the spoilers, so before we get to that, let me talk about some of the things I did like about the movie. Once again, Ridley Scott is fucking on the ball with his visuals. This movie is fucking gorgeous to look at from start to finish. The set designers, the visual effects crew, everyone involved with the look of this movie deserve all the fucking praise, especially the cinematographer. Now, some of the visual effects, particularly the ones pertaining to the aliens themselves, weren't that great. In fact, many of them felt like video game cutscenes, especially the ones that took place in bright light where you got really good looks at them. But there are a couple shots where I was actually convinced that the alien was physically there, and it actually kind of shocked me, and those were legitimately creepy. So despite most of the big action sequences surrounding the alien, with the alien in broad daylight running around, attacking them with machine gun fire, that not working as much, the actually creepy sequences, stuff like the aliens lurking in the shadows right before they strike, all that stuff worked well. To the point where I actually wish this went more the horror route and less the action horror route. Now, the other thing I really liked about this movie is that not only do all the actors involved in this film give fantastic performances all around, even Danny McBride, I actually found myself empathizing with the characters in this movie way more than I did the ones in Prometheus. Even though the characters in this movie make some pretty dumb mistakes themselves. But the difference is, most of the character mistakes made in this movie are due to being emotionally compromised in the moment. For example, there's a scene in which one character decides to break quarantine despite that not being protocol, so it doesn't make sense logically to do it, but knowing that it's someone that he loves on the other side makes perfect sense. It's one of those, you know it's the wrong thing to do, but your heart is just pulling you in the wrong direction. And a lot of the mistakes made in Prometheus can't be chalked up to anything like that. It's just dumb characters doing dumb things even though we're told they're all supposed to be geniuses. So that's a definite improvement over the last movie. And one of the other things that's also an improvement over the last movie is that this movie actually does feature the aliens. But this is a double-edged sword because the fact that it actually features the aliens means it also goes into why the aliens were created in the first place, and trust me, this is the moment that's going to divide Alien fans more than anything else in this movie. And while I was really happy to see the proper xenomorph, the one that we all know and love, on screen once again, and actually being done pretty well for the most part, the answer it gives for why the xenomorph exists and where it comes from is incredibly fucking infuriating. It definitely takes a lot of the menace away from the alien, and I kind of wish they didn't actually answer it. But I'll go more into that when I get to the spoilers. One thing I do like, though, is they do add some new aliens into the alien family in this movie, and while at first I wasn't sure how I felt about them, as the movie went on, I actually liked them. So yeah, Alien Covenant, man, it's really hard to describe my feelings towards the movie, because it's like, I like the movie itself, but I hate its place in the franchise. So there's part of me that had a really good time, but there's this other part of me that's just fanboy pissed off. And those two parts of me are warring hardcore right now as I record this vlog. So I guess if you are a hardcore Alien fan, I would be very skeptical going into this movie because you might be as pissed off as I was. But if you're not a hardcore Alien fan, or if you were a hardcore Prometheus fan, you might actually enjoy where this movie goes better than I did. And it's weird because the best parts of the movie are also tied in with the worst parts of the movie because they all revolve around Michael Fassbender's performance. The journey that Michael Fassbender's character goes on over the course of this movie is hands down the best part of the movie, but it's also the part that I fucking hate. And I don't know how to come to terms with that. It's a very weird emotional state to be in with a movie. So anyway, my fellow Gorehounds, if you would like my more elaborate thoughts, I will get into them when we get to the spoilers, but until then, if you want to go see Alien Covenant yourself, it is currently available in theaters. But if you're waiting to see Prometheus first because you haven't seen Prometheus, and I highly recommend you do if you go watch this movie, then be sure to check below because I'm going to provide an Amazon affiliate link to the original Prometheus, and if you click that link and watch it through that, then I get a kickback from it. And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, let us get on to the spoilers, and let's see if I can kind of parse how I feel about the movie talking about the plot. So yeah, the spoilers, here we go. So the movie opens up with a prologue of Weyland-Yutani, the guy who created the synthetics in the Alien universe, with the most famous synthetic being Bichir from Aliens. And in this scene, Weyland-Yutani, played by Guy Pearce, wakes up David, the character that Michael Fassbender played in the original Prometheus film, for the first time. Which, if you haven't seen the original Prometheus, in the original Prometheus, Michael Fassbender played this synthetic named David. And what this scene basically does is it sets up the fact that Weyland-Yutani kind of saw himself as a god. He's created these synthetics, with David being his most advanced version up to that point. And David was very much created in Weyland's image, and as a result of that, he's incredibly curious with a thirst for knowledge. And he also loves things like classical literature or classical music, much like Weyland does. But unlike Mr. Weyland, he can not only play classical music, he can also create it himself. That's not to say Weyland can't create, he obviously created the synthetics, but music and art eludes him. And so the conversation between David and Weyland escalates to the point where David points out to Weyland that he is going to outlive Weyland. And not necessarily in the way that a son outlives a father, but because he is a superior creation than Weyland is. And this presents this very fascinating question that drives the core of this movie. If the creation is superior than the creator, then who, I ask you, is the true God? And this question drives the entirety of this movie, and it's definitely the part of the movie that I like the most. But it's also the part of the movie I like the least, and I'll get to that when I get to that. And holy shit, I just realized that that whole prologue with David and Weyland also explains the events of Prometheus way better than the movie itself did. We then flash forward 10 years after the events of the original Prometheus, and here we're introduced to the spaceship Covenant, which is essentially a colonization spaceship. It houses about 2,000 people, and it's got even more people than that if you count all the embryos that it got frozen inside for artificial insemination. But much like in a lot of Alien movies, we're first introduced to this spaceship when everyone is in cryosleep, and the only one awake is Walter, the synthetic currently on board. And Walter, much like David, is also played by Michael Fassbender, but he's an upgraded model, which will become important later on in the movie. And we find out that this ship has been on course to this planet for fucking years, and they still have 7 years to go. And it turns out the way this ship keeps on going without losing power is that it occasionally has to unleash these giant solar panels. But something goes horribly wrong when a solar flare hits their ship and everything just starts to fucking explode. So in order to save as many as possible and to repair this ship so they can get back on course, Walter wakes up the flight crew. But unfortunately, the crew suffers their first casualty when their captain, who is played inexplicably in this really small cameo by fucking James Franco of all people, his cryo tank refuses to open and he ends up getting burned alive inside when it's compromised. And what I really like about the death of this captain is that Ridley uses this as a way in order to introduce us to the dynamics of the rest of the crew. For example, we're introduced to the captain's wife this way as she mourns the death of her husband, the only reason she went on this trip in the first place. She and her husband had this dream of going off to this far-off planet and building a cabin on this lake and living like colonialists. But it's all taken away in an instant, right off the bat, right as the movie starts, and this is essentially what the character has to deal with for the rest of the movie. So anyway, the crew awakens, and upon the death of the original captain, the second in command takes command, but he's not sure he's fit for the job, nor does he think that anyone respects him. But then they get a distress signal, and when they trace that signal, it goes back to this one planet that they didn't seem to catch when they first charted the region, and unbeknownst to them, this planet is completely habitable. So the crew's all like, we just had this giant accident, we really don't want to get back into cryosleep after what happened to the captain. Why not scrap this 7-year journey and instead go to this planet? Much to the protest of the captain's wife, and they really should have listened to her given what happens next. And when they get there, this planet is lush as fuck. There's trees, there's rivers, there's fucking giant mountains, it's beautiful. So they decide to land on the planet, and they split up into 3 groups. One group to stay by the ship and repair the comms, because there's a giant storm booming overhead, and it's made communication really shitty. Another group to go collect soil samples, water samples, plant samples, just to kind of, estimate how hospitable the planet is. And then a third group to go follow the distress signal and figure out where it's coming from and who's sending it. And what this third group ends up uncovering is the space jockey spaceship from Prometheus 1. And when they go inside, they find this remnant of this distress call that Elizabeth from the first movie left on the ship, but they don't find her herself, and the spaceship has obviously been there for a long time because there's all this overgrowth around it. And simultaneously, one of the grunts who's protecting the scientist chick who's collecting all the samples and who also happens to be the wife of the new captain, this grunt accidentally steps on this pod that releases all these spores into the air, but he doesn't realize that the spores themselves are actually alive and they fly into his ear canal. And that's another thing this movie does really fucking well. There's a whole lot of fantastic body horror throughout. And this is truly surprising because a lot of the body horror is actually being done with CGI, but it actually looks pretty good. So anyway, this grunt gets infected by the spore, while simultaneously this other grunt has the same thing happen to him over by the spaceship. So you have these 2 guys that are infected by this mysterious spore thing, and then all of a sudden one of them starts getting really sick. And they get him into the med bay, but then all of a sudden, blood just starts spurting all out of his spine, and splats right into the transport pilot's face, who freaks out and has no idea what to do, and she just ends up running outside and calling the people in the spaceship. But then bursting out of the back of the guy who's infected is a new form of the alien that's all white, and it just starts mutilating the scientist chick. And this is a hard R movie, so it's gory as all fuck. Scientist chick and the infected grunt are fucking dead, and then the pilot grabs this machine gun and tries to kill the alien thing. Meanwhile, the other group catches up just in time to see the transport ship blow up, and right after that happens, the other infected guy starts having an alien burst out of his fucking body, but this time it comes out of his mouth. And this is fucking gnarly. I fucking loved it. It just slithered out like a fucking snake. And then we have this sequence where the surviving ground crew are hunted by these 2 aliens in this field, kind of like that scene in Lost World with the raptors. And one of them gets his face mutilated, and I can't remember if it was from being slashed off or if it was from the acid blood hitting it, but either way, it's just fucking gone, and he's just dead. And then I think one more of them dies in this sequence until this mysterious man appears and shoots this giant flare in the air, and the flare freaks out the white aliens, who run into the forest and disappear. Meanwhile, back in the spaceship proper, the acting captain on the spaceship is freaking out because his wife is down on the ground crew, and because he doesn't know what happened to his wife, he just wants to fly down there to save her, but he can't because that would break quarantine. And so essentially, he's stuck in one of those Star Trek The Next Generation situations where he doesn't know whether to go with his heart or to go with the rules. And come to think of it, this entire movie kind of felt like an extended Star Trek episode just with the aliens instead of another species. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Back on the planet, the ground crew are led by this mysterious guy into this abandoned city. It looks like everything's put together by all these decaying bodies, but when you get a closer look, they actually are bodies. It looks as if a singular event happened at one point in time in this city that left everyone within it instantly burnt to a crisp. And they're all perfectly preserved in these charred skeletons. It's fucking creepy. But even so, I do have to ask, how did these people not notice this before they landed? It's literally only a mile from their landing point. And it's fucking massive, and it's surrounded by these mountains that are shaped like faces. There is no fucking way these people did not see it when they were coming down from the clouds. So the mysterious man leads them into the center of the city where he reveals himself to be David, David, the synthetic from Prometheus. And he vaguely explains that he and Elizabeth landed on this planet like 10 years ago. And now that I think about it, this is actually one part where the writing of the movie kind of left something to be desired, because I feel like these characters should have been way more curious as to what happened here. Now, while the writing might be weak there, where the writing is incredibly strong is in the interactions between Walter and David. There's this really beautiful scene when Walter and David are connecting with one another when Walter comes in to ask about what happened to the city, and David distracts from that question by teaching Walter how to use a flute. And this is where we find out that unlike David, Walter was not programmed to create. It's one of those kind of uncanny valley kind of situations. The more human-like the robots seemed, the more humans rejected them. And these scenes when David is basically this prophet who is teaching Walter how to be human are fucking gorgeous. Michael Fassbender is playing both parts, so he's essentially playing off of himself, and he's knocking it out of the fucking park. This scene leads into another scene which reveals that David and Elizabeth landed on this planet and they accidentally released this spore that was on the ship, and it just annihilated the entire population of this planet once they landed. Meanwhile, one of the white aliens sneaks into the center of the city and sneaks up on one of the survivors taking a bath. And this is a good example of the movie being really fucking good when it sticks to horror over action. Because when she realizes the alien is behind her, she turns around and then standing there like this, almost humanoid-like, is the white alien. But you can't see its mouth and it almost looks vaguely human enough to where it's really unsettling. Unfortunately, when the alien actually interacts with her physically and starts attacking her, it starts to look a little video gamey and a little less real, but hey, whatever. But after this scene, David walks in on this alien and they have this moment where they're like staring at one another like connecting. But then the captain comes in and shoots the alien like, what the fuck are you doing, David? David freaks out in a way that doesn't seem understandable. Like, why would he freak out with the aliens being shot? He's supposed to serve the humans. But then he calms down and leads the captain into this other room where everything is revealed. And this is the point in the movie that I fucking hate. Alright, let me try to get this out as, eloquently as I can without letting my anger overtake me too much, because I really fucking hate this plot point. Alright, you all ready for this? Here we go. So what David reveals to the captain is that while he's been living on this planet this last 10 years, he's been bioengineering his own creations. And this is when he leads the captain into a room which has the xenomorph facehugger egg. Naturally, the facehugger comes flying out and latches onto the captain, and now we have our first incubated baby xenomorph. Which incubates a little too quickly for my taste. In the original Alien, it took a while before it finally burst out, but that's another issue. No, my main issue is that David created the xenomorph? Are you fucking kidding me? David, the synthetic created by a human, Weyland-Yutani, created the xenomorph because he wanted to be God. Now, that makes perfect sense for this movie and its narrative, and it's actually well written with this narrative. But as a fan of the Alien franchise, that's fucking stupid! We had all this mystery in the original Alien, all this potential with the space jockeys and this alien species, but no. Which, by the way, doesn't really make it an alien anymore. It's now a human creation by proxy, because we created the synthetics and the synthetics created it. I mean, yeah, he technically used the stuff that was on the space jockey spaceship to create the xenomorph, but still, I was more willing to accept the bullshit fan canon stuff about them being created by predators, for fuck's sake. And what I hate about it is because this is an actual prequel to the original Alien, that makes it canon, and that just annoys me because now it changes the original Alien. Because now instead of a bunch of space truckers fighting this alien species that we've never seen before, it's this thing that we have seen before, and in fact we kind of created by creating synths. And it's really funny because up to that point I was really fucking loving the movie, but then that happened and now I have all these mixed feels. Did I like the movie? Did I hate it? Yes, on both accounts. I loved it and I despised it. Now, this vlog is already way too long, so I'm not going to spoil the rest of the movie. I'm going to leave that for all of you to watch for yourself. But I will say this movie does end on sequel bait leading up into another movie. And actually leaves you with way more questions as to what's gonna happen next, because there's still gotta be a whole bunch of shit that happens between this and the beginning of Alien. Like, number one, they leave the planet at the end of this movie, so the space jockey ship that's on the planet is just left there. So clearly that was not the space jockey ship from the original movie, so there must be another one that comes into play at some point. And somehow David's xenomorph has to get on that spaceship and just, oh god, there's gonna be a shit ton of these movies, aren't there? And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, as per usual, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as always, my fellow Gorehounds, peace out, and I'll catch y'all later. Brought to you in part by a generous donation by the Center for Unease Control.